Sudan's crackdown on anti-government protests has left more than 50 people dead and hundreds more injured. One protester, Mohamed Masri, lost his hand when he picked up a tear gas canister that had been thrown by police. The canister exploded in his hand, ripping it to shreds. But the injury has not deterred him from continuing to march, making Masri an icon for many other protesters, as Naba Mahidin reports for VOA from Khartoum.
20-year-old student Mohamed Masri joined December protest at the University of Khartoum over the government's handling of the economy. When police fired tear gas to break up the protest, Masri picked up a canister that landed near him on the ground. It exploded in his hand.
I remember a loud sound. I was standing by a wall. Once I opened my eyes, I saw parts dropping from my hand. When we arrived at the hospital, doctors immediately chopped my hand like this.
While recovering from his injury, Masri, in a Facebook post, urged protesters not to give up. Thousands responded, promising Masri they would not let him down.
Masri has inspired thousands of young people with his resistance. His injury didn't affect his actions. We already lost what can't be compensated. We don't have any choice but to keep protesting.
Authorities shut down the universities, and activists say at least 57 people have been killed in 3 months of protest scenes, including students. The government say it will investigate claims that security used excessive force.
Yes, the demonstrations resulted in injuries in both protesters and on the police side for many reasons. The protests were unauthorized and protesters put up fences and locked down streets. There are ongoing investigations into the injuries of protesters, as well as police and other security forces. There are no results yet, but we're expecting them in the coming days.
The protests were sparked over the government's response to a bread shortage, a sudden tripling of the price. Sudan was already suffering 70% inflation and fuel scarcity. The protests turned into calls for the end of the President Omar al-Bashir's nearly 3 decades in power.
As youth, we're looking for a better life. We have many demands. We can postpone studying for now. It's not a big deal. Our future can be restored, but the country's future can't be delayed.
After he recovered, Masri organized a protest in his hometown, Amputee, attracting hundreds of supporters. He says a top hand won't stop anyone who has a will to see change in Sudan. Naba Mahidin for VOA News, Khartoum.
The Democratic Republic of Congo is experiencing what has been described as one of the longest outbreaks of the Ebola virus disease in recent times, and health authorities are making efforts to educate people about the disease and about preventive measures, especially in areas that are affected by the current outbreak. In Beni, a city in the country's northeastern region, focus is on schools and school children. Take a look.
Like a typical morning at school, students in Beni, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, assemble outside their classrooms. But today, the curriculum is different. Because it is a school in one of the areas affected by the current outbreak of Ebola in the country, they're being educated about Ebola preventive and protective measures. Ghislaine Katungu, an official from the Risk Communication and Community Engagement Team of the World Health Organization, carries out such Ebola education initiatives in several schools. Katungu, a mother of 2 herself and expecting her 3rd child, explains the issues to the children in a way they can understand. She begins by asking the students what they know about Ebola and how they can prevent themselves from it, before clarifying and explaining the signs and symptoms and how they can protect themselves.
I noticed that many children don't fully understand Ebola. One student asked me, why do we have to wash only our hands, not the whole body? And this is why I decided to go from school to school, to raise children's awareness about the disease.
She works closely with school authorities who appreciate the importance of reaching out to the young ones.
Children who are the messengers to their parents. Children are also curious. They question everything. This is why I find that this messaging comes at an important time.
So far, more than 10,000 students were reached through the means. The World Health Organization and its partners have already visited more than 100 schools in Beni alone. The initiative started in August 2018, days after the beginning of the current outbreak.
Well, as rising nationalism and the crisis surrounding Britain's exit from the European Union intensify divisions on the continent, a new exhibit in Paris looks instead at a powerful unifier. Music arriving with post-war colonial migrations helped to turn two of Europe's most important hubs, London and Paris, into multicultural melting pots. From Paris, Lisa Bryant reports for VOA.
Rhythm and blues, reggae, rye and rock and roll, Europe and other Western regions got world music long before the term was invented. Even the Beatles were much more than a British brand, borrowing from Asia and sometimes West Africa. How it blended into popular culture today is a central theme of a new exhibit that examines 3 decades of post-war migration to Paris and London through music. France and Britain needed extra manpower to fuel their fast-growing economies. They got it from former colonies that had just achieved independence. For the immigrants, it was a tough beginning. In Paris, workers from North and Sub-Saharan Africa lived in hostels known as foyers.
They were working in factory during the day, and so sharing the life of everybody working in the factory. But at the end of the day, they vanished in their foyer.
The immigrants were initially sidelined from France's mainstream musical scene as well. Things changed in the 1970s.
The music became something very strong to protest, to exist in the public space as an instrument of revolt and protest.
Across the channel, migrants in London also faced racism, but they were introducing the city to ska and reggae from Jamaica, music from East Africa, and calypso from Trinidad and Tobago.
They could become profoundly London, and in a sense I think that's a measure of how much this migration has transformed London by the end of the 1980s.
The parents of British musician and filmmaker Don Letts emigrated to Britain from Jamaica as part of the so-called Windrush generation. He says they wanted to integrate by denying their roots. It didn't work.
Ironically, at a grassroots level, it was their culture, particularly their music, that would capture the imagination of the white working class kids. And it was our culture that would actually help us to integrate with society.
Letts says the cultural exchange went both ways.
I grew up digging the Stones, the Beatles, Bowie, Roxy music and all the rest of it.
Meanwhile, Paris by the 1980s had become a hub for African music. Singers like Papa Wemba, Khaled, Youssou N'Dour and Salif Keita.
Out of pleasure, I was discovering all these new musics. And I thought it was a gold mine because it was fascinating. It was all these incredible bands.
The musical fusion has left a powerful imprint on today's artists. And it has changed not only how we think about music, but about each other. Lisa Bryant for VOA News, Paris.
Well, that's it. I'm Vincent McCoy in Washington. Chamberlain also has our last word from Lagos.
All right, thank you, Vincent. We look forward to bringing you another show next week. ChannelsTV.com is your source for news, sports, and other programming. I'm Chamberlain, so thank you for watching. Goodbye.